Jordan Thomas, welcome to the Game Informer Show, sir.
Oh, thank you very much.
Yeah, it's an honor to have you. If you're watching the video version, you should be very impressed by Jordan's backdrop and professional mic setup. This is a hell of a thing you got going on over there.
Well, I stream a permadeath D&D show, and so I invested perhaps unwisely in a little bit of equipment.
Wow, what's the name of the show?
It's called Dice with Death, and the first season has not all been released yet, but is complete. It was very bloody. And the sort of basic premise is that any player whose character dies is actually off the show. And so death has a certain set of stakes to it, and the players take it very seriously.
Is that bizarre? Like, do you look at the Twitch chat and the Twitch feed? Are people just constantly leaving comments like, talk about BioShock 2? What do you think about Ken Levine?
There was definitely a non-zero BioShock factor when we first launched, but I think as time went on, it's such an acquired taste that the people who stuck around are definitely there to watch nerds roll dice.
Well, hey, it's been fun watching you slowly tease the new project you guys have been working on Twitter. It feels like it's always nice when you can feel anticipation, maybe dread, tension from developers coming through on Twitter in the ramp up to announcing their new game. So now you've officially announced, the Blackout Club. Do you want to talk about what it was like to keep this thing under wraps for so long?
Well, sure. And as I do, please let me know if this microphone is so sensitive that it picks up internal screaming. We've assembled a team of ex-BioShock, Dishonored, Thief, Deus Ex, even Prey people who have spent their years in AAA trying to sort of perfect interesting systems that the player can combine to kind of weave their own play style out of the ether. And so the idea of bringing that to a cooperative horror game in particular has been intense, and there's been a lot of soul searching involved, but I think everybody on the team feels like it's a really interesting problem, and we've come out the other side ready to show people something that we're quite proud of.
Yeah, it's bizarre. I mean, with that kind of talent all funneling into a game, I mean, how much pressure is there to just do okay, should we just make a game where we can work shock in some way cryptically into the title just to rope in that crowd? I mean, are there those discussions early on?
There were. In fact, this game spent at least a few months as a more contiguous, not quite single player, because it was always cooperative from the beginning, but more contiguous, sort of trapped in the underground maze beneath this sort of suburban town. And it followed the formula in the sense that it was a mystery where you sort of slowly came closer to the final sort of narrative beats, and eventually you would come to an ending. What it has become is much more of almost a teens versus monsters simulator, where you and your friends are investigating this sort of terrifying secret under the ground of your hometown, but the adventure goes on forever. The design is procedural, and so challenges and objectives will change night to night, and you don't really ever know what you're in for.
And so why the change? Were you thinking more of, I don't know, Twitch streams in mind, or what were the decisions behind that?
It's honestly a very good question. The biggest thing that I think we felt that we were missing is time in the kids' neighborhood. So you're playing, sort of people and from 13 to 16, give or take, that sort of Stranger Things or It Follows range of age. And the original design, because we had to stay 100% contiguous, you were trapped underground for a lot of that time, because otherwise the player will say, well, why don't I just go to the cops? Why don't I just wander off?
Yeah.
And so we said, okay, no, let's build a little bit of the sort of neighborhood above. And once we were leaping from rooftop to rooftop and recording the creepy stuff going on down in the street, we were like, this has to be the game. And so we broke it into missions that you can sort of dip into and that have their own kind of boundaries. But there's never a question of, do the kids go home? Because the answer is yes. Between missions, they do. And they go back to their hideout and they talk about what happened. And, if you manage to record some interesting sort of creepy evidence, you can review it back in the hideout sort of without annoying your fellow players.
I'm trying to wrap my mind around what this game is, which is a good sign because it implies that it's doing something new for the video game space. So it's one long continuous story, or it's just kind of an ambiguous world and you get more and more details the more you play, but there's no real end game in sight. It's just mission after mission after mission.
It's sort of along the lines of Lovecraftian or cosmic horror, where like if you've played Call of Cthulhu or any of that kind of ilk, where the mystery is vast and you are just flashlights in the dark trying to catch a single contour and describe your experience based on that single detail. And so the shape of whatever it is that's lurking in that unknowable darkness is so huge that you're not going to defeat it. You're sort of always constantly looking for answers and trying to survive the night. So the missions essentially go on forever. Each night, your objectives are very, very different. We want it to feel like you never know what's around the corner. And the hope is that as you get closer and closer to the sort of secret heart of the facility underneath the town, this sort of great maze that looks almost like the inside of a human ear, you'll get access to more of the thinking behind the antagonists without ever actually unseating them. Forgive me.
How do you incentivize players to keep at it? Is it just the minute-to-minute gameplay and the loop is going to be so enticing that, like, yeah, you'll scratch the surface of the unknowable? How's that for a carrot?
It's that is a very fair question. I think that the sort of primary answer to that is that you are growing your character towards an eventual end. Your individual sort of profile is this sort of teenage investigator, and you have different powers and abilities that you kind of slot in like cards in a deck. And as you make progress, as you record physical evidence in the world with your smartphone, you are gaining experience points that are commensurate to the difficulty of that moment. So, for example, if you had an objective tonight, which was record your friend being dragged away by the boogeyman, that is a highly risky thing to engineer. And so we're going to reward you for that. And your character might gain an entire level from that single act. And so as you do that, you unlock further powers, and eventually you will cap out that character. And I'm not going to reveal what happens there, but suffice it to say that it's something that we are planning for. A sort of ascension.
Interesting. Okay. I mean, just the idea of co-op horror, I feel like companies have tried before, and it's always especially tricky. Also, randomly generated horror, procedural generated horror is difficult, and you're trying to tackle both in one game. Has it been a challenge? Do you want to talk about that process and kind of the do's and don'ts along the way?
Certainly, yeah. I mean, I would say that I want to be candid. I think that relative to a game that lays claim to procedural content in the sense that the environment is randomized, that is not us. We come from the BioShock school of thought. We like the game environment to make a very strong statement about who lives here, what their day-to-day life was like, what their pain is. And so the neighborhood itself is a fixed location with, and we know who lives in every house. And if you visit that house, you're going to see, you might see a new email or something that is a detail of that person's life you didn't see the last time you visited. And what attacks you inside the house might be very different. But the actual environment is something that means a lot to us. We want you to feel like a real hometown that you're visiting. You gain access to more and more of it as you play more of the game. And so as we expand the sort of base of content of the original map that we're going to ship with, you're going to potentially visit a school or go to a secret facility, which is TV to be announced, involved with a kind of conspiracy that is powering this town.
Yeah. So overall, how's the development been so far?
I would say it has been dizzying, but in a good way. I think everybody that we've spoken to about the game, just friends and family, they all have a Goonies in their heart, or a Stranger Things, or an It Follows, or an It. Whether it's Stephen King or even on the other end of the spectrum, like a Supernatural. That idea of people who deeply care about one another investigating the sort of dark heart of their town, the kind of truth monster that growing up eventually forces you to confront. They all have responded to that instinctively. We haven't had to do much explaining of that core premise. And because that is true, we're very confident taking it to places you might not expect, because we believe that you'll be invested in just these kids and their bond.
Okay, and hopefully your friends as well.
Hopefully your friends as well. I mean, we're going to have, it's a drop-in, drop-out co-op arrangement, so people can join your mission in progress, and they can leave if needs be. And you may even be able to press your luck where if you've completed one objective, you can sort of fold and take home what you, or rather cash out and take home the experience you've got so far, or you can invest in pushing your luck and going for another objective that same night. But if you do, every little crime you commit creates this sort of creepy music under the layer of the concrete, the sort of the streets of your town. And that creepy music corresponds to your crimes and brings the boogeyman one step closer to attacking you. And so there is an escalating risk the later you go, but the best loot, both sort of player customization and also tools, are rewarded to players who are willing to court calamity.
Okay, you mentioned the boogeyman a couple times now. How does this work? Is it just one nemesis-like figure, or is it just an enemy type, or how do you define the boogeyman, I guess is my question.
You don't, is the answer to that.
Okay.
Steven Spielberg famously said that if he had more money, he would have shown more of the shark, which in my opinion would have friggin' ruined it. So the truth is that there is something out there which you can only see in game by squeezing your eyes shut and succumbing to your blackouts, the sort of eponymous blackouts that all the kids share. They all have lost time, where they wake up at a crossroads in the middle of town covered in dirt and don't know what they've done. Well, if you close your eyes and sort of you see this awful kind of theater of the mind, you can see this white shadow coming at you, and you can only see it when you do that. That is the boogeyman. It's not really the formal name for it, but the kids don't know what else to call it, and you might find that it's right next to you when you do that.
Are you looking forward to modders just ripping the game apart and finding out that model and swapping it out for some wrestler at some point?
Yeah, it'll just be a texture of me like tiling and flipping them off.
Is there a publisher for this game?
There is a publishing partner. At the moment, it's sort of at their discretion whether they want to disclose who they are and their involvement. We're sort of following up on that. But yes, we do have some very gracious assistance this time around, and we're very grateful for it. But at the moment, I think they're sort of deciding how they want to announce themselves.
Okay, gotcha. And I mean, are you planning early access? It seems like a ripe game for that idea.
I agree. Yes, we haven't talked about an exact date for that yet, but there is something powerful about the unsafe feeling people have going into an early access game, and we would like to harvest that one way or another.
Unsafe on a technical level, horror level, just everything could be horrifying.
Yes to all.
All right. I mean, what about the studio these days? I mean, are you guys working remotely? Are you in the studio right now for Question, or what does the actual studio look like?
It's about half and half. Since the release of the Magic Circle, we have doubled in size from 3 to 6, plus a number of satellite contractors who have been just miracle workers for us. We're still working with Patrick Balthrop, speaking of one of those contractors who does all the audio for the game and from the teaser trailer that you might have seen. And we have David Pittman on, who did Eldritch, and who was an indie, a sort of indie guru before we even broke away from AAA. And so we're now at 6 folks, 3 of whom are in-house and 3 of whom are remote. Okay.
Is 6 a sweet spot for you in game development? Do you feel like there's something magical in this arena?
Honestly, yes. We might expand someday to be a terrifying 10, but I wouldn't want to go much larger than that because I know everyone's individual quirks, and it's not entirely unlike being these sort of teen friends together till the end. Like it feels a little bit like that same kind of band that you had of BFFs.
And so, who's the boogeyman in the game industry then?
Ooh, dang good question. I'll tell you what. I'll go with Jonathan Nordhagen. Because he's going to be releasing his game at the same day that we're announcing, and he's my nemesis now.
Who is this
We're
guy?
actually very good friends. He's the guy who's doing Where the Water Tastes Like Wine.
Oh, of course. Okay, gotcha. What a weird deal. I mean, so what was the release of Magic Circle like for you? I mean, you doubled in size, so it must have been successful on some fronts. What was that whole process like once actually you got it out the door?
Yeah, the main thing it proved out was our ability to complete things. The Magic Circle was not a financial success by any means. We survived, and we did well enough that we're still here. But it was a sobering lesson about the changing shape of the indie game industry. If you're going to do a short, narrative-driven game, you better be very confident in its sort of mainstream appeal. And we were doing something, frankly, for us. And we learned a lot from that, and it was very cathartic and helped us sort of frankly stop brooding. It was a comedy. It was a very sort of meta, silly thing about an unfinished game being finished by you from the inside. And we learned a lot, and we now trust each other implicitly. And that is why we're taking so much of a risk here with the Blackout Club.
I mean, to what level are you talking about stopping brooding? Is it just a matter of shifting environments for the type of game that you're making, or literally like, I just find myself complaining about the game industry so much, I need to make a game to get that out of my system?
Maybe it was a little of both. I mean, I shipped 3 BioShocks prior to working on the Magic Circle, and BioShocks, as much as I dearly love them, have a reputation for being a little self-serious. And so the Magic Circle was the other end of the spectrum, where it sort of said, okay, the kimono is open. Look at how broken all of these elements of the game, and indeed the people making them, can be. And it was an opportunity for us to sort of make fun of ourselves and our big fat story.
Are you happy with the way it was received? Do you feel like people, I mean, going back to one of the earliest questions, people just too easily were like, oh, this is a game about bashing Ken Levine. I think I get it.
I did certainly hear that, and that's part of the reason why Ken did a voice for us in the game. Is we're on friendly terms, and he sort of graciously said, like, sure, I get the joke, like, and so he was actually an HR guy in a few audio logs. So that kind of knee jerk, we sort of laughed it off, because at the end of the day, we put nothing in that game that we ourselves were not guilty of, and that was a purposeful creative choice. But it did feel good to just sort of laugh at some of the tropes associated with video games and game development.
Well, I understand it was cathartic and a way to move on from BioShock. I mean, is it tough to break away from a series that big in your life? I'd imagine. I mean, we have people write into the podcast all the time that are colossal fans of BioShock 2 and just say it doesn't get enough credit. Is it just a daily basis for you? Just people tweeting at you saying, BioShock 2 ruled, it's the best one, give it its due?
Well, I'll tell you that, yes, 10 years after it would have salvaged my my fragile creative director ego, it's nice to hear. I have heard people become much more sympathetic to it years later. I think simply by virtue of the fact that it was made by a new studio in 2 years, it had a little bit of that sort of BioShock 1.5 feel, and people at the time believed they wanted something entirely new. But I nearly broke myself for that game, and so I'm proud of what we were able to accomplish in the time.
Yeah, I mean, I read somewhere that you had very clear rules. Like, all right, you have to stay in Rapture. You have 2 years to ship this thing, and it needs multiplayer. Is that just the Rapture thing specifically? Is that just a matter of art assets and the production cycle?
It was a combination, yes. Technology in part, art assets. I was absolutely told we were going to need to reuse some art, and the art done by the Irrational folks, who I was there for that game too, was so solid that it was kind of a parameter that I chafed against a little bit. But on the other hand, I deeply loved Rapture, and after doing Fort Frolic in the first game, I thought, okay, well, people liked the surreal elements, people liked the sort of nightmarish elements. What if I augment those? That horror sort of DNA has always been there for me, and I've always worked on the most horrific element of any of the games that I've been involved with, and so honestly, with the Blackout Club, it feels like coming home to vulnerable protagonists, to be able to say, like, no, you're not a sort of walking tank with a magic hand and a gun hand and a head full of bad ideas. You're just a kid trying to survive, and even though the systems allow you to express yourself, you're kind of like having to take what would be the gun hand and the magic hand in a BioShock game and become them. Like you have to combine yourself with your friends to achieve the sort of desired effect.
That's a bizarre concept, but yeah. I mean, so specifically the Lovecraftian horrors, which you're interested in. I mean, does that just rule out jump scares? What level of fear are you trying to instill on players throughout the game?
That is, man, I'm glad you asked that because I wouldn't have come to it on my own. But it rules out jump scares almost entirely that we script in a manipulative fashion. We have designed systems which, if you'll permit me to go way back in time,
sure.
We've designed systems that sort of lean on some of the stuff that I was doing back in Thief 3 with a spooky asylum mission called the Shellbridge Cradle, where the hope was that jump scares would come out of natural systems interacting and player decisions. So In the Blackout Club, for example, if you happen to close your eyes at the right time, you can see this sort of boogeyman shape right next to you and have a jump scare that was 100% natural, a product of the sort of ecosystem. And our producer, Patches, Michael Kelly, recently was recording a playthrough video where he closed his eyes at exactly that moment. He had a syringe in his hand, which is ammunition for the sort of tranquilizer crossbow. And the shape was right there, and he just started screaming in front of the entire office and stabbing in space. And of course, the thing pounced him. But it was legendary, and like we had no specific engineering of that moment. It wasn't a scripted scare at all.
Is it more fun to design a co-op game just because playing it over and over again, there's more variety? Do you feel like the team is still somewhat energized by playtesting this thing?
Always. And they only become more so as we integrate more of the sort of procedural elements. Our big goal is to surprise ourselves with the content, so as long as the combination of the room that you're being asked to visit for an objective's sake, the twist on the objective, and the challenges you met along the way kept us on our toes, we feel like it's got legs for the players who are willing to invest lots and lots of hours. And so yes, those moments are what we live for these days, and I hope to make Patches scream many more times before we ship.
All right, so I'm trying to think of how people are going to frame this game. The headlines people are going to write trying to describe it, which I'm sure is very frustrating to the talented dev team. But if people are just like, okay, so it's kind of a Left 4 Dead meets Stranger Things, what do you think about that comparison?
That is, I would say, 100% accurate. Certainly an internal touchstone. As far as the gameplay experience, I'd say it's sort of a first-person cooperative horror game centered around this group of teenage friends investigating a monstrous secret beneath the skin of their town. And from there, hopefully, a lot of the sort of implied tools and techniques will become obvious.
Yeah, I mean, coming from a love of D&D, did you consider having kind of the DM in this game, kind of the more asymmetrical format for the scares?
Oh my God, yes, constantly. Like I basically am always thinking, where can we integrate a hidden room where you see the sort of battle mat and you see the miniatures and so on without people saying you guys are copying Stranger Things? Like, no, those kids were not born when I became into D&D. Dang it. But I'm sure we'll have to keep it sort of liminal.
Yeah. So, I mean, did you go down that road at all of having any sort of control for the other side? Do you feel like that has been done more in the industry in the last couple of years, so it's less interesting?
Honestly, I will never sort of lose my love for the dungeon crawl. Like Darkest Dungeon is a game that in many ways changed my life. I put more hours into that one than I can think of, and no other procedural game ever sort of connected with me on that level. And that is horror meets the dungeon crawl. In the Blackout Club, our specific sort of gesture towards that is the growth system, the sort of major and minor powers that you earn through play, and the combos and upgrades of which make your specific teenage investigator much more potent and varied from your friends after you spent a few hours in our game experience. So I think it has, RPG tattoos on its back, and you have to sort of spend a little time with it before we reveal them, which is a very weird metaphor when dealing with teens, but there it is.
I mean, you mentioned Thief 3 a little bit earlier. I mean, there are other games throughout your history of game development that you've been thinking about a lot while developing this game. Are there certain lessons where it's like, you know what, on this game we learned this lesson, let's apply it here? Is there what era of your life you've been ruminating on the most recently, I guess?
Well, the practical reality is one of the major ones. Like, this is unsexy, but just the business mindedness that brought us to, okay, this game is going to involve players working together, because players are always more interesting than a canned AI. And moreover, that the adventure goes on for as long as you want it to, and as we update the game, new elements will leak in, but you don't see the single scripted cutscene and then you've expended the content. That is the main thing that we learned on a sort of pragmatic level. On a more personal, creative level, I've wanted to do modern horror since 2005 or 6. The universe that this takes place in, I developed way back then, and it's just evolved over time. It has we talk about Lovecraft. It has a very deep and I would say slightly crazy-making mythos at its heart, and we will only ever reveal parts of that to you. And so it's fun to finally be able to do horror in a modern setting, because all of my other games have been either sort of quasi medieval steampunk or period pieces like BioShock.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm thinking now of Fractured But Whole also had kind of Lovecraftian stuff, at least during one segment in a modern school or like neighborhood environment. I mean, so you were a consultant on that game, or what was your actual title there?
Yes, creative consultant, I think, is what my title's shipped as. I have a good relationship with those guys, and we continue to work together on any of their RPG projects.
This is Ubisoft specifically, you're saying?
Oh, sorry, I couldn't hear that.
Ubisoft San Francisco specifically?
Ubisoft San Francisco, but specifically South Park themselves. I was sort of brought in for the first game, and my relationship has really continued mainly with the South Park digital studio.
Oh, wow. How did that come about?
Well, after BioShock Infinite shipped, I departed the 2K Games sort of studio in Novato, and amicably, said, "Hey, you shipped it, so thank you." And I said I was going independent.
Yeah.
But there was some time to wait while my partner Stephen Alexander was moving out from Boston, and he and I had worked together on BioShock 1 and wanted to start the studio. But in the meantime, an old friend who had worked with Ubisoft previously put us in contact with Ubisoft SF, and they said, "Okay, look, like we have so many cool elements. We would like somebody who can speak writer and television person, and also speak game person, to sort of help bridge the two development groups for that game." And they apparently liked what I had to say, because we've continued to work together since.
That is an almost impossible spot to be in, I feel like. And they've been working together for years and years, and then for you to come in, I'd imagine that takes a lot of confidence to say, "All right, Matt and Trey, here's what you need to know. I know that I'm not somebody that you've been working with for years. You've been working with RPG experts, but here's why you should listen to this new voice in the fray."
It would have been, except that they're big gamers. I don't want to speak for them, but I've always felt that that was easier than everyone imagined it would be, simply because they were versed in the language of games and they cared about the thing being a functional and interesting game experience first, and they knew they could deliver on their end of it.
Yeah, I mean, but is it an overall lesson of just because you're a gamer doesn't mean you're a great game designer?
I think so. I mean, they would probably be the first to say that they learned a lot across both games, and I've always been impressed with the degree to which they are willing to own what they have, their original kind of ignorance about this or that concept, and what they can do with it now to improve each game they work on. They're sharp guys. They adjust well.
They're geniuses for a reason, some would say. Yeah.
There is that, yes.
Do you have any sense of the South Park Studios' reception towards Fractured But Whole's release?
I don't. I mean, not in the sense of they all seemed very proud. And the last time that we sort of spoke about Fractured was right before ship. And so we're in casual contact and stuff like that. But I think the biggest thing they were proud of is how much more coherent it was. I think, as they've talked about before, the original game was really, really big, like Skyrim big, and there were a bunch of editorial choices made to bring it in smaller. Whereas this superhero story was fairly crystallized early on. They knew what the beginning, middle, and end looked like.
But that just means that they're going to get especially sick of that story by the end of it. But
that could be true, although it wasn't drawn out over the same amount of time either. I think there was I think they had learned, here are the places where we have blown cold on story elements in the past. And so they locked those down early and just said, like, okay, these are our pillars, and we'll continue to, if we change details around them, the pillars must stand.
That's interesting. So you get the vibe that they want to continue making RPGs going into the future.
Oh, that's a good question. I'm definitely not going to answer that one. I don't know for sure.
Well, hey, you talk about how much Matt and Trey learned. What did you learn from working on those games, specifically from them,
man.
or maybe just the development teams overall? Was there an epiphany or two along the way for you?
Just that the core absurdity at the heart of game systems interacting with a human will always be a source of unexpected humor. And so if you can lean into that as opposed to sort of like placing a fig leaf over it and trying to ask the player to look away from it, some of the most powerful sort of laughs come from acknowledgement that the player is always kind of smirking at your gaminess, and you can embrace that, I think, to your merit.
Do you have specific examples from those games that jump out?
Sure. One of the jokes we collaborated on in The Stick of Truth was a fellow who is leaving audio logs in a spaceship-like sequence, and by the end, he's like, "The only thing that there is to eat is audio logs." and I was involved with that one and very happy with the result.
Wait, what extent, in that specific case, because that is one of the highlights of Stick of Truth, is the stupid audio logs, to what extent were you involved then? Is it a matter of writing them, coming up with the idea, or just being the audio log expert, weighing in on certain tropes?
I was in the writing room, and they work with a lot of other writers who are in the room, but the truth is that, like, I am not going to teach them how to suck eggs. Like, they always deliver the final script in a game like that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's crazy. So something that really pops out when looking at the games you've worked on in the history is the Harry Potter game, Sorcerer's Stone.
Oh, wow. Jeez. All right. Now you're going back even further. I'm very comfortable.
Yeah, we're going to keep going back till eventually you're just a child. It's really all going to work out till you're around like that 13, 16-year-old age, of course. But so with the Harry Potter game, do you think it's your most successful sales-wise game ever? I mean, I was looking at like PlayStation 1 sales charts a while ago because I'm a big old dork. I was like, what the hell? This is like the 7th most highest-selling PlayStation 1 game of all time. It's just unthinkable.
Yeah. Now, there is a point of clarity, which is that I worked on the PC version. So I think the answer is no. I think that BioShock eventually outsold the PC version of Harry Potter, which was built by a company called Amaze Entertainment, where I had my first design gig. It was still wildly successful and way more so than anything I would work on for years. And we did our best very rapidly. But yeah, the main thing it did for me was teach me to use Unreal Ed and teach me how to respond to feedback without, letting my tiny ego shatter. It gave me. I met Ben Golis, a brilliant designer who is sort of an unsung hero of the game industry. Basically, I think he redeemed me from becoming a terrible adventure game designer. Like I probably would have gone into just hand-drawn art and a few dialogue trees without that education.
So, I mean, how did it humble you? What did you have to scale back? Was it a matter of you got on the project and you wanted to just blow it out? I don't know if you're a Harry Potter fan or what, thinking that you could kind of bite off more than you could chew?
I did research. I read those books because of that game, but I did enjoy them once I sort of cracked the first one. Talk about teens versus the truth monster, right? Like,
yeah, it's true.
There's if I'm honest, there's probably a DNA going all the way back to there from the Blackout Club. But I wanted systems that let you do whatever you want, or at least purported to do whatever you want, where you've got kind of a chemistry set and you combine them to make things go boom your way.
Yeah.
Harry Potter did not have room for that kind of thing. It was a puzzle game where you did this and this and this and this, and then we allowed you to the next room. I definitely walked out of that knowing I never wanted to work on that kind of thing again. And hence my time at Ion Storm Austin with the Thief series and onto BioShock.
Yeah. I mean, that chemistry set idea, and then it wasn't until Breath of the Wild, I feel like, where it was fully tackled in a giant way, maybe.
Yeah, and now it's coming from the other side of the globe. That's the sort of glory of Breath of the Wild. Is it feels like, Westerners cannot claim the immersive sim anymore. They're all over the place, and arguably it's becoming a meaningless term.
Yeah. Did you play a lot of Breath of the Wild?
I watched my wife play a lot of Breath of the Wild. I have taken a vow not to play anything single player because not only does it focus me back on multiplayer games, but my friends are very busy and it helps me manage my time. So I'm playing the hell out of Divinity Original Sin with Ken Strickland, who I work with on Fractured But Whole.
Oh, yeah.
And I play Darkest Dungeon with my son. But I always have to have a ride along. And so far, I'm sticking to it.
Awesome. Well, hey, Blackout Club, how close? Do you have a rough idea of how close you guys are to getting out there in some way, shape, or form?
Well, officially, it's Q1 of 2019.
Okay.
That is our official release date. Like you said, this game is ripe for early access, so there may be some other announcement along the way, but that's what we can commit to. As far as playability, well, we've got a very good friend with whom we'd like to do a first playable sort of announcement where you can see real gameplay for the first time. And exactly when that's happening, we can't reveal just yet, but I'm hoping not too long. This game was playable early, as a lot of good multiplayer games have to be.
Yeah, absolutely. So if people are interested in following the game, where should they go? Is there a Twitter account?
Yes. So there is at the Blackout Club is our Twitter account, and they can also go to www.blackoutclubgame.com. And you can find us there, and you can also follow me at Nullspeak on Twitter if you want. I will sometimes say things that we wouldn't with the official account, and that's what I got.
Awesome. Hey, Jordan Thomas, thank you so much for your time, man. Really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you so much for watching this excerpt from the Game Informer Show podcast. You can subscribe to the audio version and listen to new episodes airing every Thursday. We cover big games on the horizon, games that we've just reviewed. We have long-form developer interviews, a lot of fun stuff. So check it out every Thursday.